Hello, welcome to this video from TimeVaryingLights.com. I'm Dan Bennett. In this video we're going to take a look at how you can optimize and enhance your images using an application like Adobe Photoshop, which is what I'm using here. There are other applications that will do as good a job, for example the GIMP and Paint.net, both of which are free and downloadable from the internet. This image that you see here is very cool. It's actually taken from a plasma TV. I used a computer to display an image to the screen which was black with a white bar across the middle part of it. And to the human eye, the white bar looks like it's constantly white, but as you can see, it's very clear by taking a swept photograph of it that the white bar is anything but constantly white. We have some white and some yellow and some dark green and even some blue. And this shows that the plasma TV's time-varying behavior is actually very complex and only revealed when you do vision jiggling or sweep a camera like this.
Shoot, 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 shoot.
So the question is this image as good as it can be, or is there room for improvement? Well, there's a very useful tool in Photoshop and similar applications which will help us figure that out. One of the key areas that we're interested in is dynamic range. In other words, we'd like the black part of the image to be truly black and the white part of the image to be at or nearly truly white. Is it in this case? It looks like it might be, but let's verify it. Photoshop and similar applications have a tool called the histogram. So I'm going to the window menu, I click on histogram, and here is the histogram. For photography, the histogram is a very, very useful tool, and photographers use it all the time for judging whether the photograph they just took was captured overexposed or underexposed, or with a color cast, or so on. In this case, what it's showing us is the distribution of the brightnesses of the pixels in this image. The left-hand end corresponds to black, the right-hand end corresponds to white. You'll notice here we have a very strong peak at the left-hand end. Well, that's because we have a lot of black pixels in this image. The whole background here is black. This mountain range in the middle corresponds to the rectangular area here of pixels that are lighter than black. And you can see that there's several different brightnesses represented here, as you can see from the way the rectangle varies in brightness. But there's one thing that's really apparent from this histogram, and that is that the brightest pixel is right here. In other words, there is nothing brighter in this image than 2/3 of the available brightness for this image. Everything out here is kind of wasted space. It's wasted dynamic range headroom. So one thing we can do is we can increase the brightness of this image without destroying detail quite effectively. That's what the histogram tells us. I'm going to dismiss the histogram, and I'm going to use a tool called the Levels tool. And on Photoshop, you access that by hitting Control L on Windows or Command L on a Mac. This is the Levels tool, and you can see our histogram is reproduced here once again, very similar to what we saw before. But I'm going to make use of these little slider widgets that are underneath the histogram, because that lets me control how the histogram gets mapped to the output image. In particular, because we have a big empty area over here, I'm going to grab this right hand slider and pull it towards the left. As I do so, look what happens to the image. You see how it's getting brighter and stronger. Take it back out again and back in again. And you can see that by doing this, I am strengthening the punch, the visual impact of the image. So what I've done here is I have now mapped the lightest pixels in the image to white, a true white that uses the full dynamic range of the image and will print better or will look more engaging on a display. Now, most tools in Photoshop have a preview button, so if I uncheck preview, we get to see the image as we started with it before applying any adjustments in the Levels tool. If I click preview, then we can see where we ended up. And you can see that I have retained all the detail, but I have made the image much stronger and much punchier. Here's another image. In this case, this is a dot matrix LED sign that is by the roadside. It's outdoors, it's at night, in a city, and there are streetlights that are illuminating the scene. And the result of that is that the whole background has this orange wash to it. It's not particularly dark. So what we're going to do here is use the Levels tool to enhance the darkness of the image to make the red LEDs really stand out. So once again, Control L or Command L to bring up the Levels tool. Here's our histogram. We can see that there's this very large area of mostly dark pixels, and that corresponds to what we're seeing here in the background. So the first thing I'm going to do is to reach for this left-hand slider and pull it towards the right, and you can see immediately that by pulling to about here, I can make most of the background disappear down to black while preserving the bright traces of the LEDs in the middle of the screen. So that, at one stroke, has completely enhanced the picture. If I toggle the preview button, this is what we started with, and this is where we took it to, and it was very, very easy to do. So you'll find a lot of images, especially in city scenes at night, may benefit from pulling the black level up into the histogram a little way. So here I've loaded another image into Photoshop. These 4 red lines actually come from 4 red beacons at the end of the runway of an airfield. And the small dark lines that you see running across these traces actually come from the wires in a diamond pattern wire fence that runs around the edge of the airfield. One thing that you might want to do with an image like this is to crop it, because sometimes when you sweep the camera, the composition of the image that you get is not necessarily ideal. And as long as your camera has a fairly good number of megapixels, then cropping should not destroy the quality of the image by any significant amount. So to improve the impact of this image, I'm going to crop it. So in Photoshop, I click on the crop tool, and here are the crop boundaries. Now, just for consistency with other images, I'm going to crop at the original ratio. I could crop unconstrained, which would mean that I can change it to any shape I like. But here I'm going to keep the ratio constant. So I'm going to grab the corner here and resize it there, and then pull the image down into the middle until I get the composition I want, which is probably something like that. Maybe make it a little tighter. And then I click the check mark at the top to say, okay, we're done. And if I now fill the screen with this image, my new image here has, as you can see, a much better composition where the traces of interest actually fill the image much more satisfactorily than before. The final thing I want to show you in Photoshop is a cool trick for generating some very unusual images that are artistic and captivating. This image here is a scene from Las Vegas. You can see the word Vegas down here. That's kind of a clue. And all I did was I swept the camera downwards while shooting the photograph. And so there are a lot of time-varying light sources in this image, especially apparent in the top left. This street light here, the neon here, and this blue stripy thing down here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to invert this image, or put it another way, I'm going to turn it into a negative. In Photoshop, the easiest way to do it is to press Ctrl I for invert, or if you're on a Mac, it would be Command I. And in an instant we have a rather different looking image, and it's got some subtle pink in it here. The brightest things end up black, the dark background ends up white, and all the colors are inverted. Well, it's pretty good as it stands, and I like this image, but what I'm going to do is strengthen it a bit, give it a bit more visual body. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up the Levels tool as before, but to optimize the tonal balance of this image, I'm going to pull the middle slider to the right a bit. And what it does is it strengthens the darkness and the saturation of the colored elements in the scene. If you do it too far, everything gets rather dark and the detail gets lost and you end up with some noise. If you pull towards the left, everything gets washed out, colors are lost, and it becomes a much more pastel image. So pull it to the right to something like that, and that to me looks good. If I remove preview, that's what we started with. This is where we ended up. Before, after. Click OK. and this image is now the way I like it. So hopefully this video has given you some ideas of things that you can do to your photographs after you've captured them and you've brought them to your computer. Thanks for watching.